Good evening and welcome to another edition of Down to the Wire. I'm your host, Derbyologist, and joining me again this week is co-host Captain with Candace. Candace here. Candace, this week we've got three preps to take a look at. Two of them are for 3-year-olds, and then we're also going to take a look at the Oaklawn Handicap for older horses. But let's start at Keeneland with the Lexington Stakes, and it drew a field of 8 horses, and we got a couple of horses going up in class and a couple of stakes horses kind of dropping down.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a mix for what is kind of our last Derby prep. Not worth as many points as the others, but maybe for horses who are a little bit on the border of making the cutoff for getting in the race. So if you win here, you can get a couple of points that might push you over that edge. You'd have to think the class in here is perhaps Tisnar RJ and Divining Rod, both who exit races in kind of other regions. Divining Rod running mostly in Florida. Tisnar RJ has been down in Louisiana and most recently ran at Sunland. It's an interesting race because I think there is definitely some speed in here. Donruth likes to go forward, as does Henry Jones. Divining Rod, I don't necessarily say he needs the lead, but he likes to go forward as well. And I mean, ultimately he's going to be my choice. This isn't a field that I really like any of horses in here, and even if they make the Derby, I don't think any of these are real threats to win that race by any means. But I think Divining Rod, the key for him here is that he drew the rail, and he does have that early speed. So if he can get himself well positioned early on, kind of save ground throughout the race, then I think he rates a chance here. Coming off the class drop now from Tampa over to the spot has finished behind Carpe Diem and Amy's Flatter last time out. So we saw what Carpe Diem did. There's not really any Carpe Diems here, so I'm going to go with Divining Rod.
Yeah, I took you got Fame and Power ships in from the West Coast, and he's got a little bit of speed. He wasn't even favored in his last race when he won at 7 furlongs. So I find him kind of interesting, and I think he's ultimately the speed of the speed. I think Divining Rod got the lead in those last 2 races, but it was more of the case of other horses maybe didn't want the lead, and he kind of just inherited the lead. I'm going to go with Donworth. It's kind of a tough choice here because he was entered in a different race, allowance non-winners of 2, and then they saw potentially a short field. He was all the steam in his debut race and got steadied, and everybody saw the trouble. But it does look like a horse that should stretch out. He's a huge horse. Like, this guy may eventually give Dortmund a run in the weight department because he is a big-looking horse. So I'm going to go with Donworth and just totally picking on raw talent. Normally it's a bad angle because there's 3 things against him. He's stretching out. He's facing winners for the first time, and he's going into the stakes race for the first time. So that's normally one of the things I never bet on, a horse trying 3 new things for the first time. But I just think he may have a little bit more talent. And then I do think Fame and Power on the stretch out as a speed does have a little bit of a shot here.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these where it's all going to really depend, I think, on some of these horses who are dropping down. I think Divining Rod at least has legitimate form, though you would think he'll probably be favored. Tisnar RJ, I think, is the one who would be really tough to take in this spot because he seems to have some hype. People tend to like him. I think people will see him in the spot and think that he should be more competitive here, but he comes off 2 very bad runs. I know we both mentioned in our Sunland Derby preview that we couldn't have him anywhere because we couldn't explain his performance in the Risen Star. Well, I can't explain his performance at Sunland, and I think it was worse. I think he regressed even more. So he's one who I think might go up here at a pretty short price, maybe second favorite, who I really couldn't have anywhere.
Yeah, Tisno RJ, it's tough to make a case for after those last 2 races. I guess if you're the optimist, maybe you just want to say that he's faced International Star and Firing Line, and you're just hoping maybe some of those form lines come through. But I don't even know what he is anymore. I don't know if he's a front runner, a pace setter, a stalker. So I'm going to toss him, and who knows, maybe the price floats up on Donworth just a little bit to make him bettable at 2-1 or 5-2 or something like that. Next race is the Oaklawn Handicap. This has been a traditional race at Oaklawn Park for many years, and this year looks like we're going to have a good betting race with some, it depends on your opinion on the race, but I think you can make a case for a few horses.
I think so. I think of, the few races we're previewing here tonight, that this is definitely the best betting race of this kind of group. I'm really intrigued because I think there's a few horses here that tend to take money, predominantly Tapiture, who's a horse that I'm definitely a fan of at least I was last year. His comeback, I think, left a little something to be desired, and I know it was his first time back off quite a long break, and we would expect improvement here. But I think he'd be a little tough to take at a short price. I kind of want to see him do it once on the track because he's one of these that he's always going to be short. So if I'm going to bet him, I want him to be in, decent enough form, which I'm just not sure he's quite there yet. I think, they have bigger and better things down the road for him, and this maybe isn't necessarily the spot they're looking at for him to peak. Ultimately, I'm going to go with a horse that you picked last time out and cash with Race Day for kind of the same reason why I took Dividing Run last time, because he's breaking from the rail. He's a horse who does have early speed, so I like that he's breaking from the rail in this spot. Pletcher Velasquez is never a bad thing to have over at Oaklawn either, and he's gotten, he seems to get 1 1/16 miles well enough that I, think 1 1/8 will be fine. I'm not too worried about that. Maybe his form's a little dubious with having beaten Midnight Hawk, who isn't, really of this class, but I thought he did it well enough, and like I said, I do like him breaking from the rail in this spot, and it's a competitive race, but there's no world beater in here. I think you can make a case for 4 or 5 horses, and, mostly because, again, there's a few horses coming in here who should be the class of this field, but perhaps haven't found their best form yet this early in the season.
What's your opinion on that speed figure? Because when I saw that speed figure on that race day last time, I just kind of shook my head.
You shake your head at a lot of speed figures. Yeah, I mean, it was huge, and that's not what I would expect. I mean, it's far and away higher than anything he's ever ran before, so I guess, maybe some people will be looking for him to bounce in the spot if they believe in that theory. I don't know. It's not something that I'm really factoring in a whole bunch. It does seem a little high, but...
Yeah, I mean, I just thought I'd never considered. I mean, the problem is the speed figures in some ways they're supposed to reflect just the speed of the race and what the horse did. What's happened is they've evolved into class ratings. And so whenever a horse that is an obvious inferior ability to another horse gets a higher speed rating than them, people freak out. And that's just one of those things where he got the quote-unquote same speed figure as Shared Belief. There's some people that think that, oh, that means he's as good as Shared Belief. And no, it doesn't. It just means he ran, like that's the problem, is that people want to make him performance figures and they're not. So he's not anywhere near Shared Belief, but yet that can still be a 106, yet if you take it as a 106, and then if supposedly if him and Shared Belief face each other and they both have a 106, like we all know who's going to win. So I do think that's where it gets a little bit tricky sometimes, is that people overestimate. Like, I just think he's kind of a grade 2 horse. I thought it was a little bit sloppy the last time. I thought there was like 3-4 horses that just didn't show in that race. One of them was Temperature, and the other one was Carve, who warmed up really well. I'm going to go with For Greater Glory. Just like this last race, I think he's rounding into form. I think there may be enough of a speed here to kind of set it up for a pace collapse. And Carve is kind of my second pick. I just think that last race, I don't know. I don't like the speed figure. It was sloppy that day. He ran extremely game. Maybe he's going to bounce. I'm not so sure he's going to bounce because I'm not so sure he ran that fast. But I'm just thinking maybe this is the time to go with one of these other guys, and I'm going to take For Greater Glory.
Yeah, I agree that this is the time that if you're going to take a stab against some of these. Carve, I've been on his last couple races in a row, and he's disappointed me, so he's definitely one that I couldn't be on. And like I said, Temperature, he's going to be fine. He's going to round back into form. Because he's always going to be the favorite in races like this, I'd just rather, if I was going to, chalk it up and take his favorite price, I'd rather do it when he's in form. And he's just not there yet. I think he might need another race.
We move on to the Arkansas Derby, and this one features a field of 8, and this one is another, really the final big prep for the Kentucky Derby.
American Pharaoh wins. Anything else I need to say?
Well, his morning line is 1-2.
Yes.
The last time he got by, it was a sloppy track, and he got by with 115 fractions. I mean, I guess I mean, everybody's going to be watching him. I mean, we have to try. I mean, he has to get something out of the race.
He does. I think, this, for him, this is a perfect kind of race, because I think it's a race he can win without necessarily being, pushed extremely hard, which I think is kind of what you want going into the Derby. I agree, you want him to have to work a little bit. You don't want him to be lackadaisical in these races, because the Derby's going to, really, he's have to fight in there to get a win or to run close. In this race, so for betting purposes, I just think it's a race where you kind of have to either just, I mean, if you keep him on top, I don't even know if you're going to get anything off of that unless you have some sort of a bomb. I would be more inclined to make a place bet on, like, Mr. Z. I think, everyone makes fun of him. He's crazy. I get it. Blinkers back on. I just don't think they'd run him here if there was, something physically wrong with him. And if there's nothing physically wrong with him, well, then he fits in this spot minus American Pharoah. So I would, maybe put a place bet on him. I've never liked Far Right. I couldn't have anything on him at all. Um, maybe what's more interesting about this race is, aside from American Pharoah, is the implications that some of these horses can have on the Derby. Mr. Z is not in there yet. If he, runs in the top four, he should be in. That'll bump somebody out. Made from Lucky is one who got 20 points. If he gets any points here, he'll bump somebody out as well. So we have a few horses who, even if they just run fourth, will bump somebody out right now. And so I think maybe that's the more interesting implication in this race.
Yeah, I think, well, obviously, my pick is American Pharoah, but I guess to me the way to approach it is I think Made from Lucky is probably going to get overbet a little bit just because of the connections, and he ran second. And I just think he ran second by default the last time.
Yeah.
So to me, it's a straight exacta. Playing the two horses that have ran their two last races in a slop, and now they'll get a dry track. So to me, it's American Pharoah straight over the Truth or Else or Bold Conquest. I do think Bold Conquest actually did miss a couple of workouts, and he probably wasn't as cranked for the last race as he could be for this one. So that might give him a better chance of getting second. And then the Truth or Else, not that he hasn't run good in the slop, but slop races are hard to tell. Like sometimes horses can run big races in the slop, but if they run on the slop every time, then they start to kind of tail off. So I think, he's got the rail post. Last time I thought he clearly moved way too soon. I just think they're going to lay back and make one big move. Both Bold Conquest and the Truth or Else, if they get third or better, can make the Derby and knock somebody out. So, and I think really that's the goal of those two horses. Both of them have connections. I think they're just looking for third or second, and if they close, they can, maybe close in the Derby. So that's the way I'm going to play it. I think Made from Lucky is a little dressed up off that last slop second, and then I also Far Right has only had 3 workouts in 2 months in March and April combined. They took 60 days off, and that's never a good sign. It just never is. Last year we saw it with Cairo Prince, and we saw it with a few others out on the West Coast. And this year we saw it with Far From Over. I mean, you take the 2 months off, and normally they say everything's all right, but it just doesn't seem to be. So Far Right to me is kind of, and he'll be bet. So, I mean, I think you might be able to hit a $10 or $12. I mean, you might be able to hit an $18 exacta with one of those two that I'm suggesting, which is 9-1 on Pharoah.
Yeah, one interesting thing with the Truth or Else, I'm glad you brought him up, is that I've noticed that aside from his maiden victory, the races he's done well in were the races where, they've really gone at a good gallop early. He's tended to struggle in races where there's been a slow pace, which is a little counterintuitive because even though he comes off the pace, he's not, he's not a back marker or deep closer by any means, but he seems like he's a horse who, he really wants to go at a good gallop early, so it'll be interesting to see here, how much pressure somebody, if anybody, tries to put on American Pharoah. If, I think if any pressure at all is applied, even if it's by cheap speed, that'll just, fall away. I think that can only benefit the Truth or Else.
Well, we're both picking American Pharoah. He is going to be one of the, if he wins this race, probably one of the top 3 choices for the Kentucky Derby. Any thoughts on last week's 3 big winners, and who are you kind of leaning towards? Some people are saying it's going to be Dortmund. Some people are saying it's going to be Pharoah. I guess who do you think will be the favorite? I guess assuming Pharoah wins this weekend.
I think that American Pharoah will be favored. It's kind of been that way all along. So that's what I expect if he wins well here, which he really should do. As far as last week goes, I would say, I was there today. I needed to see Dortmund, so I was very impressed by that win. He just looked the winner throughout the race and really traveled like a dream. I know some people have kind of suggested that they don't think he'll get 10 furlongs, and there was nothing in that race that suggested to me that that would be the case. So, I definitely put him among the top contenders. I think he's, perhaps the most talented of this group. I'm still kind of struggling, in my mind over, does talent trump all, or do you need to be a Derby type, and will his size and his maneuverability, maybe get in the way? But I liked everything he did there. I couldn't have asked for more in a race like that. Carpe Diem did what he did, but I don't think we learned anything new about him, and he's a horse who ultimately I'm going to be against in the Derby just because of his running style and because we don't really know how good he is, because people tend to just let him go out front, kind of similar to what we saw with Condo Commando up in New York in the Philly side of it. I will say maybe the most intriguing race was up in New York where Frosted won, and it just really seemed like going into that race that Frosted was going to win that race no matter what. Like, everybody knew Frosted was winning that race. And that indicates to me that, following the surgery and knowing those connections and knowing that, he was a very well-bred Tappet, that to me, that was their Derby. I think he was extremely well-meant in that spot. Pace totally made the race for him. He's a horse who I'm very much against in the Derby, but again, one who seems to be catching steam, and one who seems to be getting flack from the same race is El Khaibir, who, I've had mixed feelings on him all throughout the preps, but I thought El Khaibir's prep, if I had a horse going to the Derby, that is exactly how I'd want them to prep going into the Derby. Bad ride aside, he rode, well out the back behind a slow pace, came home, closed really well. His final sectional was co-fastest along with Frosted. I thought that was the perfect prep for him, and I thought it gave me every indication that, Scat Daddy or not, I think El Khaibir stays 10 furlongs.
Well, that's, last week we saw some impressive performances, and we'll see if, maybe a new guy can rise up in the Lexington, or we see what American Pharoah can do on a dry track this time, and maybe a little bit faster fractions. I don't know. Hopefully Pharoah gets a little bit of a tussle for 4 or 6 furlongs just to avoid that 114 pace and really get nothing out of the race again. So maybe the maiden on the outside will stretch out and set up a 110, 111 fractions just to kind of keep it honest. So we'll see, or maybe Mr. Z with blinkers could be back on near the lead again. So it should be a good race. I mean, you still have to win it. You still have to come out of it. That's the thing. Like, we've seen plenty of horses win and come out of their wins with issues. So, that's the problem with Pharoah. He's still got to run, and he's still got to come out of the race without an issue.
Yeah, and he's one who we know he's had issues, and so you're always a little bit more wary. And even though this week, the preps end, we still have a couple weeks to the Derby. Things can happen, plenty can change. So I know for me that it's like at this point I have, kind of horses in mind in a couple different groups, the ones I love, the ones who I kind of like, and I'm trying to find a spot for them, and maybe want to wait for post positions. And, we'll see the week of who's training well, who's even there. Because remember last year, Constitution won the Florida Derby. Everybody loved him, and he wasn't in the gate.
Well, that's definitely the case. So we'll see what happens this week. Next week, we've taken a look at some more new races. I'm not sure if we'll go to Chucktown or not, but we'll decide next week and pick out a few more races, as really the next few weeks we'll be taking a look at some of the turf races and maybe some of the older horses. And then the week of the Derby, we'll take a look really at just the 2 races, the Kentucky Oaks and the Kentucky Derby. So that's going to do it for another edition of